Have you ever heard of an Abiku child? A spirit child that never stays after birth, returning time and time again, only to bring heartbreak to their parents before disappearing again. These children are said to carry the weight of pain and sorrow, trapped in a cycle of life and death. Today, we share the story of Mimbra, a resilient woman who dared to fight against the Abiku spirit, determined to break the cycle and bring life to her children. It is a tale of love, courage, and unwavering faith. If this story intrigues you, join us on this heartwarming and emotional journey of hope and triumph. In the beautiful sunlit village of Akum, nestled between rolling green hills and swaying palm trees, lived a woman named Mimbra. She was known far and wide as the most cherished wife of Okafor, a hard-working man who had taken 2 other wives after Mimbra, his beloved first wife, had struggled to conceive. Their love was deep and enduring, weathered by the passage of 10 childless years. For Mimbra, every morning brought a new ache. The laughter of children echoed in her ears, a song she longed to hear from her own child. She would sit outside her modest, thatched hut, watching her co-wives lovingly tend to their little ones, their laughter filling the air. Even the youngest of Okafor's wives, who had only recently joined the family, was already heavy with child. Despite the kindness her co-wives extended to her, always making sure she was comfortable, trying to bring her joy, but Mimbra couldn't quell the frustration rising within her. The village women, their whispers and sneers cutting sharper than any blade, mocked her as they passed by. They laughed at her barrenness, some calling her a man for her failure to give her husband a child. The weight of those words hung over her heart, an invisible wound that deepened each day. Her home became her only refuge, a place where she could close her door to the world and escape from the pitying eyes and sharp words. One evening, as the sky turned amber and birds sang their last songs of the day, Mimbra sat outside her hut, lost in thought. Memories from her early days of marriage flashed through her mind. She remembered how she and Okafor had toiled together under the blistering sun, side by side, to build everything they had today. Every plot of farmland, every cow they owned, she had been there, by his side, working just as hard, pouring every ounce of strength and love she had into their life together. She began to cry, the tears spilling freely as a bitter realization set in. The villagers were right, she thought, her heart heavy. I have given Okafor nothing to show for our years together. Others will reap the fruit of my labor, while I die barren, with no child to carry on my legacy. The despair settled over her like a storm cloud, and she wept until there were no tears left. The next morning, Mimbra stayed hidden within her hut, unable to face the world. Her co-wives came to her door, pleading with her to come out, but she remained silent, locked in her grief. She prayed quietly, pouring out her sorrow and longing to the gods, asking them for mercy. When she finished, she wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and headed to the farm, determined to lose herself in work. The sun was low in the sky when she returned that evening, her body exhausted and her spirit wearied. She dropped her basket, feeling suddenly nauseous and weak, and stumbled slightly. Her co-wives rushed to her side, helping her to sit and offering her water, worry etched across their faces. Days passed, and her symptoms only grew worse. She found herself vomiting in the mornings and feeling feverish at night. Her husband, Okafor, became concerned and called for the village herbalist, who arrived that afternoon, her face calm but curious. After a thorough examination, the herbalist's eyes widened in surprise. She placed her hand gently on Mimbra's shoulder and announced, "Mimbra, you are with child. 2 months along." The words seemed to float in the air, almost too beautiful to believe. Mimbra clasped her hands over her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. She turned to her co-wives, unable to contain her joy. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "After all these years, the gods have finally blessed my womb." Her co-wives hugged her tightly, their own eyes wet with tears, sharing in her overwhelming happiness. From that moment on, Mimbra was transformed. Her laughter rang through the house like music, her steps light as she danced and sang, giving thanks to the gods at every opportunity. Her face shone with a joy her co-wives had never seen before, a happiness so deep and radiant that it seemed to touch everyone around her. For the first time in years, Mimbra's heart was whole, filled with hope and the knowledge that soon, she would hold her own child in her arms. When the village of Akum heard of Mimbra's pregnancy, the news spread like a warm breeze, filling every corner of the community with joy. Villagers who had once pitied or mocked her now looked at her with newfound respect and warmth. They brought her small gifts, soft cloths for swaddling, handmade toys, herbs to keep her strong, and charms to protect her unborn child. Mimbra was overwhelmed. She had never dared to imagine this moment, this feeling of belonging and acceptance. That evening, she held a tiny cloth in her hands, her eyes shining with joy. She turned to her husband, and her voice bubbled with excitement. "Look at this, can you believe it? I am finally holding clothes for our child." She laughed, a sound so light and free that it seemed to lift Okafor's own heart. He gazed at her, marveling at the happiness lighting up her face, wondering if he had ever seen her this radiant. Mimbra continued eagerly, "Tomorrow, I want to go to the market and buy more. I want to be ready for our baby in every way." But her husband hesitated, concern flickering in his eyes. "Mimbra, don't you think it's a bit early? The baby is still so small in your womb. Perhaps we should wait a little longer." But Mimbra's excitement was too fierce to be held back. She took his hands and pleaded, "Please, Okafor. I've waited 10 years for this. Let me have this joy." Her eyes were so full of hope and joy that her husband couldn't say no. The next morning, the two of them went to the bustling market. Mimbra moved from stall to stall, selecting soft fabrics and tiny garments, her heart brimming with dreams for her child. Months passed, and as her belly grew round and full of life, her joy only deepened. Her co-wives too, became a source of unshakable support, attending to her every need, making sure she was comfortable, and sharing in her happiness. Under their loving care, her pregnancy flourished, and Mimbra felt surrounded by love. Then, one fateful night, her time finally came. In the dim light of her hut, with the village midwife by her side, Mimbra gripped her bed and summoned every ounce of strength she had. Her cries of labor filled the hut, echoing through the quiet village. After hours of struggle, the first cry of her baby boy filled the room. Exhausted but overwhelmed with joy, Mimbra held her son close, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered to the gods, clutching her child as if afraid he might vanish. She stayed awake all night, gazing at him, memorizing his face, and whispering prayers of gratitude. "Please, let this not be a dream," she murmured, stroking his tiny fingers. "And if it is, let me never wake." But as the months passed, Mimbra's joy turned to worry. Her once glowing face grew pale, and she became thin and worn. Her son's cries were endless. He would not let her sleep or eat without wailing until she was back by his side. She grew so focused on caring for him that she began to neglect herself, barely eating or resting. The villagers watched in concern as Mimbra, once full of joy and life, now appeared haunted and drained. Her co-wives offered to help, each taking turns to soothe the child, but he would not calm down. Whenever he cried, he would fall ill, his tiny body burning with fever. Mimbra spent sleepless nights at the midwife's hut, seeking remedy after remedy, desperate for anything that might bring peace to her child and restore her strength. Her husband, too, was by her side, trying everything he could to ease her burden. But the baby's cries persisted, and Mimbra's strength began to fade. As the months dragged on, Mimbra became a shadow of herself, her spirit worn down by exhaustion and fear for her son's fragile health. She wandered through the village with a hollow look in her eyes, clutching her child, her once bright joy clouded by worry and sadness. Her beauty faded under the weight of her new struggles, and the villagers could only watch with pity as she became a ghost of the woman she had once been, her dreams of motherhood tinged with an unending sorrow. Months passed in a haze of sleepless nights and endless prayers, as Mimbra poured every ounce of her strength into caring for her son. Yet despite her efforts, the baby remained weak, his tiny body plagued by constant fevers. She watched him helplessly, her heart breaking a little more each day as she held him through his cries, doing everything she could to keep him safe. One night, at 3 a.m, her son's fever spiked again. His skin was burning under her touch, his cries thin and weak. Without a second thought, Mimbra wrapped him in a blanket and called for her husband, urgency filling her voice. Together, they set out in the chill of the early morning, carrying their son to the midwife's hut. Mimbra's heart hammered with fear, her hands shaking as she held him close. When they arrived, the midwife took the child, her face grim as she examined him. Mimbra clutched Okafor's hand, her breath held tight in her chest, praying silently, pleading with the gods to spare her son. But when the midwife looked up, her eyes were full of sorrow. She placed a gentle hand on Mimbra's shoulder, her voice soft and heavy. "I'm so sorry, Mimbra. He's gone." "No," Mimbra whispered, her voice barely audible. She pulled her child back into her arms, rocking him gently, refusing to believe the midwife's words. "He's just asleep. We'll take him home, and he'll wake up. He has to wake up." But her son's little body remained still, his face peaceful in her arms. She held back a sob, the weight of her grief pressing down on her chest. In the following days, Mimbra withdrew into herself, refusing food, barely speaking to anyone. The spark that had lit her heart during her pregnancy was gone, replaced by an emptiness that nothing seemed able to fill. Okafor tried to comfort her, but his words fell on deaf ears. Though he had other children, he had dreamed of this child with Mimbra, of the joy he would bring to her. It pained him deeply to see her so broken. "Mimbra," he would say gently, taking her hand, "we can try again. There is still hope. The gods may yet bless us with another child." But Mimbra's gaze remained distant, her eyes cold and hollow. She felt as though every part of her soul had been shattered, her hopes crushed beyond repair. Yet, months later, Mimbra received news that changed everything. She was with child again. Despite the grief still hanging over her, a glimmer of hope flickered in her heart. She fell to her knees, thanking the gods for this second chance, a chance to try again. "Thank you," she whispered into the open sky. "Thank you for giving me another chance." This time, she was determined to be stronger, to give everything she had. Even as her pregnancy progressed, and her baby, like the first, struggled with fevers and sickness, Mimbra refused to give up. Each time her son grew ill, she would wrap him in a blanket and walk through the dark village streets to the midwife's house, a lamp swinging in her hand. Rain or shine, she would take him to seek help, her love fierce and unyielding, her spirit fueled by the knowledge that this was her gift from the gods, a blessing to fight for. The villagers watched with pity as Mimbra struggled. "Poor woman," they would murmur, shaking their heads. But Mimbra heard none of it, her focus wholly on her son. However, when her baby reached 6 months, he grew ill once again, and one quiet night, he passed away in his sleep. When Mimbra found him, her heart shattered. She fell to the ground, wailing, her cries piercing the silent village as she held him close. Days passed, but the tears would not stop. She rolled on the floor of her hut, clutching his tiny clothes, sobbing until her voice was raw. Her co-wives, Okafor, the midwife, all tried to comfort her, but nothing could ease the pain. For weeks, she wept, her cries a haunting echo that filled the village. Her spirit was broken, her heart bearing a grief that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. But even as she lay there, defeated and empty, the memory of her son's brief life and the gift she had been given remained with her, a bittersweet reminder of the love she would carry forever. A few months later, when Mimbra found out she was pregnant once again, her heart didn't leap with joy as it had before. Instead, she was overcome with a deep, gnawing fear. She knew the pattern too well. Her babies came sickly, each one leaving her heart shattered as they faded from her life. This time, she steeled herself, taking every herbal remedy she could find, desperate to protect this child from the same fate. But despite her hopes, her baby was born weak and frail, just like the others, perhaps even weaker. Terrified that he might slip away at any moment, Mimbra and Okafor took turns watching over the baby, day and night. They refused to let him out of their sight, each holding vigil while the other rested. Yet, despite their constant care, the baby passed away one quiet night, right under their watchful eyes. Mimbra wept bitterly, crumbling in Okafor's arms. "I can't do this anymore," she sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to have any more children. I can't bear the pain." For weeks, her husband waited, hoping she might change her mind. But her grief was resolute, her decision made. She began taking herbs to prevent pregnancy, refusing to let herself hope for another child. She visited several herbal doctors, seeking answers, hoping to understand why each child left her so soon. Finally, one elder herbalist gave her an answer that chilled her to the bone. "My child," he said gently, looking at her with a mixture of sympathy and sadness, "you carry the spirit of an Abiku in your womb. This is a child who has sworn not to stay, a spirit that returns to cause pain and sorrow. It is the same child who comes to you, over and over again, each time bringing you heartbreak." Mimbra and Okafor stared at him, horror filling their faces as they absorbed the news. All this time, it had been the same spirit, returning to torment her, taking away her dreams of motherhood each time it left. The herbalist saw the fear in their eyes and offered her a stronger herb, one that would close her womb and prevent her from ever conceiving again. Desperate to end the cycle of pain, Mimbra took it, resigning herself to a life without children of her own. Over the months, Mimbra began to heal. She found ways to bring joy back into her life, accepting her situation and learning to find peace. She embraced her co-wives' children, loving them as her own, and the household grew close as the women lived together like sisters. Then, one morning, she awoke to a strange feeling. A familiar sensation told her that, against all odds, she was pregnant again. She was overwhelmed by fear, her heart racing. When she visited the herbal doctor, he encouraged her to stay calm. "This time," he assured her, "we will do everything to ensure the child stays." He prepared protective herbs and promised to be there during the birth, to help mark the child and break the Abiku spirit's hold once and for all. When her labor came, it was a quiet night. The dark hut was filled with the warm glow of oil lamps, and the herbal doctor stood by, his face serious as he prepared for the ritual. When the baby boy was born, he gently placed protective herbs on the child and whispered incantations to drive away the spirit, marking the baby with sacred symbols. When he finished, he turned to Mimbra and Okafor with a reassuring smile. "This child," he said, "is yours to keep. The Abiku spirit is gone, he is bound to this life now." Months passed and to Mimbra's wonder, her son grew stronger and healthier each day. Unlike her previous babies, this child was quiet and content, barely crying, always smiling. Mimbra's heart overflowed with joy as she watched him grow, filling the hut with laughter and play. Her son soon reached 6 months, then a year, thriving in ways she had scarcely dared to hope for. With each passing day, Mimbra grew more grateful, watching her child grow into a strong, lively boy. For the first time in years, She allowed herself to truly believe in the happiness she had longed for, treasuring every moment with her son as he filled her heart with a joy that she knew would endure. And indeed, the boy grew strong and healthy, a shining light in Mimbra's life. As he blossomed, his father, Okafor, marveled at him with pride, grateful for the son he'd watched Mimbra fight so hard to keep. The child was beloved by all, his older siblings doting on him as they took him under their wings, teaching him and laughing with him, always keeping a careful, protective eye. In this lively household, he was cherished and surrounded by love, and his presence brought the whole family closer. Mimbra watched him grow, her heart swelling with joy she had never thought she would know. She had finally broken free of the dark cycle of pain and loss, free from the haunting fear of the Abiku spirit. She had fought, suffered, and endured, and now she understood the depth of her journey, a journey that had tested every part of her spirit. Now, she felt nothing but gratitude for her child, her family, and the strength she had found within herself. Her son's laughter echoed in their village, and with every laugh, Mimbra felt herself heal a little more. At last, she was free. Mimbra and Okafor's family flourished over the years, blessed with 3 more beautiful children after their first son, Obi. Their home was now alive with laughter and joy, and this brings us to the end of Mimbra's story, one of resilience, courage, and the triumph of a mother's love.